Hey guys, happy Friday and welcome to day 23 of remote learning. And it's May. One more month of school, guys. Keep up the great work. We're almost there. So today I'm going to review our first landmark Supreme Court case that you guys read about this week. The word landmark refers to something that's significant or important. So these court cases are so significant, so important because they left a huge impact on our government and on our country as a whole. These court cases literally changed the way our country operates. So the court case we read about this week was Marbury versus Madison. So today I'm going to briefly review that court case with you guys, make sure that you have all of the correct information copied down into your notes, and that landmark Supreme Court case chart that I also had you copy down into your notes. So let's start off with a little bit of history, a little bit of presidential history. So the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, was ratified or approved the following year in 1788. And when our country took hold in 1789, our first president, George Washington, took office for 2 terms, and his vice president was John Adams, who would later become our second president. Now, you may recall me mentioning earlier in the year, when we talked about the Electoral College, that when our country first started, electors in the Electoral College actually got 2 votes for president. And whatever candidate got the most votes became president, and then whoever got the second most votes became vice president. That worked well for Washington and Adams because they were both from the Federalist Party, but this system got a little bit interesting in our third election, the election of 1796, when George Washington stepped down, allowing John Adams to become president by getting the most electoral votes, but somebody from a different party, political party, Thomas Jefferson, got the second most votes. So here we have John Adams, a Federalist, being president, working alongside Thomas Jefferson from the Democratic Republican Party, acting as his vice president. I mean, imagine today if Trump were working alongside Clinton. Probably wouldn't be very good, not very productive. So similarly, this was more of a rivalry than it was a friendship and a partnership. So go to the next election, the election of 1800, these 2 candidates face off again, and this time Thomas Jefferson gets the most electoral votes. Actually, he ties Aaron Burr for the most electoral votes, and since nobody got a majority of electoral votes, the House of Representatives chose the president. So the House of Representatives chose Thomas Jefferson, meaning that Aaron Burr would be Jefferson's vice president. John Adams came in third, so he's out of here. So this sets up the premise of Marbury versus Madison, because right before John Adams leaves office in 1801, literally days before he leaves office, he decides he's going to appoint dozens of people to federal judge positions and justices of the peace. A justice of the peace is like a judge, but doesn't have any formal legal education. Well, one of those people was this guy, William Marbury. William Marbury was appointed or selected to be the Justice of the Peace in Washington, D.C. So John Adams nominates or appoints all of these people to be judges. The Senate quickly confirms all of these judges, and then Adams is trying to send out all of the commission papers to allow these people to assume their new positions. However, since time was short, not everybody received their commission papers. One of those people was William Marbury. And the following day, when Thomas Jefferson took office, he told his Secretary of State, James Madison, to stop delivering those commission papers, that as far as he's concerned, anybody that didn't already receive their commission, it's null and void. It doesn't matter anymore. Well, to William Marbury, it mattered. He thought that he rightfully was appointed to this position and that he should be given this position. So William Marbury ends up filing a lawsuit against James Madison, saying that he, Marbury, should have been given his position as Justice of the Peace in Washington, D.C. So this Supreme Court case at first was all about the question of whether or not Marbury deserved to have his position and whether or not the court had the power to demand Madison to give Marbury the position. During the court case, William Marbury mentioned that the Judiciary Act gave the Supreme Court the right to order Madison to give him his appointment. The Supreme Court actually started to side with Marbury in this case, saying, all right, yeah, we do think you deserve your appointment, but upon further review, the Chief Justice, John Marshall, decided that part of the Judiciary Act actually went against the Constitution. Part of the Judiciary Act was illegal or unconstitutional. There's a part of the law that said that the Supreme Court had original jurisdiction over these types of cases and allowed the Supreme Court to order people to do things like give somebody their appointment. John Marshall, the Chief Justice, said, well, the way the law reads, you're right, Marbury, you should be given your appointment. However, the law is going against Article 3 of the Constitution. You guys read Article 3 of the Constitution. In Article 3, the only cases that the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over, the only cases that the Supreme Court will hear for the very first time are cases involving ambassadors, ministers, and consuls, and cases involving states, where a state is a party in the court case. So John Marshall, the Chief Justice, says this court case should have never started here in the Supreme Court. The only way we should have heard your case, Marbury, was if you had heard it at a lower court and you appealed your court case up to us. So this court case should have never even happened. Now, I don't know if anybody actually caught it in the reading, but I actually told you that John Marshall was John Adams' Secretary of State. So John Marshall was actually the one responsible for giving Marbury his commission papers in the first place. So when he became Chief Justice and then had to make a decision in this case, initially you might think that he would be biased against Marbury. He might favor Marbury. He might be biased against Jefferson and Madison since they're from the other political party. But Marshall was fair, as all judges and courts should be, and he ruled against Marbury. So that worksheet that you guys did on Wednesday to read about this court case had a series of questions at the end of it. And really, all of these questions that I had you answer set you up in order to do the notes from yesterday. So first, let's finish our Article 3 notes. They're pretty easy here. Section G reads, the most important power of the Supreme Court is judicial review. That's what really came out of the court case of Marbury versus Madison, was this idea that the Supreme Court could look at a law and decide whether or not it was legal and constitutional. In this case, John Marshall and the Supreme Court decided that part of the Judiciary Act actually contradicted or went against the Constitution. That's not okay. The Constitution is known as the supreme law of the land. Nothing can go against the Constitution. So if there is a law or something that goes against the Constitution, the Supreme Court made the decision that it had the power to strike down that law, to cancel it out, to get rid of it. So we call this power judicial review. the power to declare laws and actions unconstitutional. So judicial review not only allows the Supreme Court to declare a law unconstitutional, but also actions of the president or anybody else in government to be unconstitutional. The Supreme Court can put a stop to laws and actions that they think go against the Constitution. And again, that's what Marbury versus Madison is really all about. The significance of this court case was that it established this power of judicial review. So let's take a look at your Supreme Court case chart. So in this chart, I want you to keep the information relatively simple. You don't need to write paragraphs for all of this, although we could. The first column is the year of the case. It's not the year the case started. In this case, it would have been 1801. But when we talk about Supreme Court cases by their year, we're talking about the year the court made a decision. So in Marbury versus Madison, the court made its decision in 1803. The name of the case is obviously Marbury versus Madison. And the way a court case organizes its name is that it's always plaintiff versus the defendant. The plaintiff is somebody who is filing a lawsuit, somebody that's accusing someone of doing something wrong. So in our case, William Marbury was the plaintiff. He was accusing Madison, the defendant, of doing something wrong. The defendant is, well, defending themselves. They're the ones who are being accused of doing something wrong, and they're defending themselves in court. So Marbury versus Madison, plaintiff versus defendant. The background of this case, well, I just gave you a very long explanation of it, but quite simply, the problem the court was originally trying to solve was whether or not Marbury deserves his appointment. And does the court have the power to grant that appointment, to give Marbury his appointment? Later in the court case, however, the problem or the issue that arises is not about Marbury. In fact, the court case says, you know what, we don't care about you anymore, Marbury. We got a bigger issue on our hands, that part of this law that we're referring to is unconstitutional. So the bigger problem was, can the Supreme Court strike down a law that it thinks goes against the Constitution? The outcome of the court case, well, again, in terms of Marbury, the court ruled against him, so they did not give him his appointment. But the bigger outcome of this court case is that the court decided that part of a law was unconstitutional, and it decided to strike down or cancel out part of that law. And the impact of this court case, why this court case is a landmark, why it's so significant, is that this court case created the power of judicial review, the power of the Supreme Court to look over laws and actions of government and decide whether or not those laws and actions are constitutional, whether or not they're legal and they fall in line with the Constitution. So hopefully that clarifies Marbury versus Madison. If you guys have any questions, you can always catch me during office hours on Zoom, or feel free to just message me on Edmodo. Quick fun fact of the day before we leave here: since the Marbury versus Madison opinion in 1803, more than 1,000 state and local laws and more than 100 federal laws have been overturned as a result of the Supreme Court's power of judicial review. So you can see that this power, created more than 200 years ago, is constantly being used by the courts to review laws and actions to see if they're constitutional. Again, we're in May, guys. Only 1 month left to go. So keep up the great work. Adios.